The sound of my shoulder bone popping out of its socket cracked sharply through the empty room, followed by my daughter-in-law Stephanie's furious snarl. "Get out! This is no longer your home!" Was that the final period at the end of my life? That question, why, just keeps burrowing deep into my soul like a cold needle. My name is Daisy, and I have a feeling many of you people listening might have also chosen silence just to save face for the family, only to realize that staying quiet and being patient can sometimes just feed the malice in someone else's heart. Hello, my distant friends who are listening. Today, the sky where I live seems heavy and subdued as well. How are you all doing over there? Has the weather been pleasant enough for a walk in the park lately? If you hear your own heart echoing in my words, please tap a like or leave a small greeting in the comments so I know I'm not alone on this road of finding myself again. And now, let me tell you about the day my world completely collapsed. I stood there in the kitchen, my old hands shaking as I tried to peel those apples. I wanted to bake the pie David, my sweet boy who we just laid to rest, always loved so much. The house felt so heavy with grief that I could hardly breathe. And I just wanted to reach out and comfort Stephanie, to show her we were in this together. But the moment my fingers brushed her shoulder, she whipped around, her eyes bloodshot and smelling of liquor. She gave me such a hard shove that I went stumbling back, my spine slamming right into the sharp edge of the granite countertop. The pain shot up my back and stole the very air from my lungs. She screamed at me, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife, telling me not to ever touch her with my old, wrinkled hands. I just stood there frozen, feeling like someone had poured a bucket of ice water over my heart, my whole body going completely numb. Stephanie did not stop there. She marched over and gripped my arm tight, right where the bruises from last week were still dark and tender. She snarled that David was gone now and this house belonged to her, calling me nothing but a useless burden. She started dragging me toward the door while I tried to grab onto the frame of the house I had called home for decades. With one final violent heave, she threw me out onto the porch. I felt my left shoulder pop with a sickening dry crack as I hit the ground. I just lay there in the cold morning rain, watching my own front door slam shut in my face. Everything happened so fast, turning from care to abandonment, from family to enemy in the blink of an eye. My whole world just collapsed right there at the feet of the woman I had once loved like my own daughter. Lying on that cold ground, I did not even feel the bite of the rain, only a deep bitterness rising up in my throat. Where was I supposed to go when my keys were locked inside that house? Later that night, sitting in a dim, cheap hotel room, I finally had to look at the scars I had been trying so hard to hide. The flickering neon light from the motel sign outside bled into the room, casting a harsh glow on the dark, blooming bruises on my arms. Every time I shifted, the sharp ache in my shoulder joint reminded me of the brutal truth I had been trying to ignore. I sat there on the edge of the stiff bed, remembering the endless night shifts I pulled at the hospital as a nurse, coming home with my feet throbbing and my spirit drained. I had saved $50,000 over a lifetime of hard work. I did not think twice about handing that money over to David and Stephanie when they said they needed to fix up the house. I traded away my rest, and even those good, comfortable Clark's shoes I should have bought for my aching arches, just to see them smile. But looking back now through the lens of this pain, I see those smiles only ever showed up when my hand was holding a check. The truth cut deeper than any physical wound. I had tricked myself into thinking that suffering in silence was a virtue, a way to keep my family whole. Every time Stephanie made a cruel remark about my thinning hair or my failing eyes, I told myself she was just stressed from work. Even when she would move my walking cane just out of reach and watch me struggle to get across the room, I just bit my tongue. But that fall on the porch today finally woke me up. She did not love me. She was just wearing me down, piece by piece, both in my body and my mind. A strange warmth started to spread down my spine, and it was not the pain this time. It was a righteous, quiet anger. Enough, I whispered to my tired reflection in the cracked motel mirror. I will never let another soul trample on my dignity or my worth ever again. The next morning, I did not wake up with the usual heavy sigh of a woman defeated. I looked at myself in the mirror, smoothed out the wrinkles in my blouse, and decided to do something I had forgotten how to do for decades. I was going to take care of myself. I stepped into a Skechers store and finally chose the softest pair of walking shoes with the kind of arch support my tired feet had been begging for. It felt strange to be pampered like that, as if every step I took was getting just a little bit lighter. Afterward, I found a cozy little cafe, ordered a hot latte, and sat down to open the book I had just picked up from Barnes & Noble. The morning sun drifted through the window, warming my hands, which were still a little shaky from everything that had happened. There was no more screaming, and no more fear of being pushed or shoved. I just breathed in the scent of new paper and roasted coffee, feeling a sense of peace I had not known in years while living under that manipulation. This was freedom, a late gift, but one that felt more precious than gold. In that quiet moment, my mind went to my old friend Martha. We had lost touch years ago after Stephanie started monitoring my calls and making it so hard for me to see anyone. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hesitating before I finally pressed her name. When Martha's warm, familiar voice answered, the tears just started falling without me even trying to stop them. We agreed to meet for lunch at a small place downtown. Martha did not ask 1,000 questions. She just reached across the table and held my hand with that deep understanding shared by sisters who have lived through more than half a century. I knew right then I needed an ally, and reconnecting with the world outside was the very first brick I was laying down to rebuild my life. But that peace did not last long. As I was walking out of the cafe, my phone began to vibrate in my purse. A name flashed on the screen that made my heart tighten in my chest. Stephanie. What could she possibly want from me now after she had already thrown me out of my own home? My dear listeners, have you ever felt that weight lift off your shoulders when you finally decided to treat yourself to something you love after years of only worrying about everyone else? Please share with Daisy the last thing you bought just for yourself by commenting with the phrase self-love. I was just taking a small sip of my warm coffee, feeling the steam brush against my cheeks, when the phone started vibrating in my hand again. It was Stephanie. I took a long, deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs until I felt a sense of forced calm before I dared to answer. Her voice came through the speaker, and it was a shock to my system. It was not that jagged, hateful snarl I had heard yesterday. Instead, it was this high, sugary tone that felt so artificial it made my skin crawl. She called me Mama in that soft way she used to do years ago, asking me where I had gone. She started apologizing, claiming she had just had way too much to drink and did not know what she was doing. She even had the nerve to ask if I had remembered to bring my blood pressure medication with me. I looked down at the dark, purple bruises on my wrist and felt a heavy, bitter irony. I knew deep down she was not truly worried about my heart or my health. She was just calling to find out where her money had gone since she probably just found out. I froze those secondary credit cards earlier this morning. I told her I was doing just fine in a very short and even voice, using that same professional tone I had spent 30 years using to keep patients calm in the emergency room. There was a long, heavy silence on her end, and I could practically hear her heart pounding with frustration. I imagined her teeth grinding together as she fought to keep her true temper from breaking through that thin layer of politeness. Then she started talking about the money, bringing up the bills and how David's funeral had been so expensive. She said she had just opened a notice saying the electricity was going to be shut off if she did not pay it right away. There it was. Her true motivation was standing right in front of me. She was still trying to use my son's memory as a shield to make me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. But for the first time in a very long time, that old guilt did not take hold of me. All I saw was a desperate woman who was terrified of losing the control she thought she had over my life. I spoke clearly and told her that all financial matters would be handled by my lawyer from this moment forward. Stephanie snapped like a dry twig, and her entire attitude shifted in a heartbeat. She started screaming into the phone, asking if I had completely lost my mind, and if I really wanted to drag our family name through the mud. She shouted about what David would think of me if he could see how I was treating his wife. The insults started flying, and the things she called me were like sharp stones. I felt my pulse start to quicken in my neck, but it was not out of the old fear. It was because I finally felt the absolute certainty that I was finally on the right path. I did not give her the satisfaction of a response. I just moved my thumb and quietly pressed the button to end the call. The long silence that followed felt like a victory, a solid boundary I had finally built for myself. After the line went dead, I just sat there in the quiet of the cafe for what felt like an hour. I realized then that her sweetness was nothing more than a cheap mask she wore when she wanted something from me. A real sense of confidence was starting to take root in my soul. I was not just some fragile old lady named Daisy who was going to hide in a corner every time someone raised their voice at me. I have spent my entire life working hard and taking care of people who were at their lowest, and now I realized it was finally my turn to take care of myself. I opened up my phone contacts and searched for the Morrison Law Office. I knew it was time to bring every secret into the light of day, not because I wanted to be mean or angry, but because I deserved justice, and I had the proof to get it. But my refusal to be her victim had pushed Stephanie into a dark place. She was not going to be satisfied with just yelling at me over the phone. When I drove back to the house later that afternoon to pick up the last few things I had left of my David, I had no way of knowing I was about to face the most terrifying moment of my entire life. I let myself in with my spare key, just wanting to grab that tin box of David's old pictures. But the moment I stepped into the living room, the heavy, sour smell of liquor hit me square in the face. Stephanie was sitting right there in my favorite armchair, her eyes red and full of a kind of meanness I had never seen before. She stood up, stumbling a bit as she came toward me, and asked if I really thought I could hide from her. I stepped back, my hands gripping my purse tight, and told her I just came for my things. She let out a cold laugh that made my blood run cold, and told me that in this house, everything from the rug on the floor to the roof over our heads was going to be hers. The greed in her eyes was enough to make me sick to my stomach. She started rattling off David's insurance policies and those savings accounts she figured I was hiding from her. When I told her she was not getting any passwords, she lost whatever bit of control she had left. She lunged at me, grabbing my wrist right where it was already bruised from her rough hands last week, and she squeezed it so hard I gasped. She snarled at me, saying I was old and would be in a nursing home soon anyway, so that money ought to go to someone young like her. The pain from my shoulder flared up and shot through my whole body, but this time, it did not make me shrink away. It lit a fire of righteous anger I had been holding back for far too long. I found a voice I did not even know I had and told her to get her hands off me. I used every bit of strength I had left in my old bones to shove her back. Stephanie went stumbling and hit the bookshelf hard. I looked at her, my eyes welling up with tears, but my voice staying steady, and asked her if she really thought I was blind to what she had been doing. I told her I was quiet when she pushed me down those stairs 6 months ago, and I stayed quiet when she called me names in front of the neighbors. I told her she made a big mistake thinking my love for David made me weak or foolish. All those years of hurt came pouring out of me like a dam breaking, and I named every bruise and every insult she ever put on me. Stephanie's face twisted into something unrecognizable. She grabbed a porcelain vase off the table and smashed it on the floor, sending white shards flying everywhere. She sneered at me, asking who was ever going to believe a confused old woman with high blood pressure and a failing memory. She stepped closer, pointing her finger right in my face, and threatened to make my life a living hell if I did not hand over those passwords. She even told me she would call the police and tell them I was the one who attacked her. That threat was so cruel it made my skin crawl, seeing how she was trying to turn the victim into the villain. But that lie only made me more certain that I had to get out of there right that second. I pointed toward the door and shouted for her to get out of my house. Stephanie laughed at me with pure contempt, but when she saw I already had my phone in my hand ready to call 911, she finally grabbed her bag. She told me to just wait and see, because that property was going to be hers whether I liked it or not. She threw one last threat over her shoulder and slammed the door as she left. I sank down onto the floor right there among the broken pieces of porcelain, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I felt completely drained, but deep inside, I knew I had just won the most important fight of all. I had finally beaten my own fear. I sat there in the heavy silence for a long time, feeling the ghost of David's eyes watching me from his photo on the mantel. I knew Stephanie would not stop here. I knew she would come back with even dirtier tricks. I could not just sit around waiting for her to find some scrap of kindness that was not there. I needed a real plan to protect myself, a real defense. My fingers found my phone again, and this time, I did not call Martha for comfort. I called Mr. Morrison's law office one more time. I told him I needed his help right now, and for the first time, my voice did not shake. After that, I knew I could not live in that constant state of looking over my shoulder. I started turning my home into a fortress, not just with new locks and cameras, but with the kind of legal walls that no one could ever tear down again. The first thing I did was hire a locksmith to come out and change every single lock in this house, from the front door to the windows and even the garage. I did not want Stephanie to have even a tiny chance of sneaking back in with that extra key she had secretly made. Hearing the heavy click of those new deadbolts sliding into place felt so solid, and it gave me a strange sense of peace I had not felt in a long time. I also had them put in a security camera system that I can check right on my phone whenever I need to. Now, whenever I hear a little noise out in the yard, I just have to look at the screen to know if it is just a little squirrel or an actual threat. The next step was making sure my money was protected. Following Mr. Morrison's advice, I went down and opened up a brand new bank account at a completely different branch. I moved all my savings and my pension over there, and I made sure to cancel every single power of attorney I had ever signed for David and Stephanie in the past. My lawyer also helped me go over my will with a fine-tooth comb. We worked through every single detail to make sure there were no gaps Stephanie could try to wiggle through later on. Focusing on those numbers and legal terms helped me push the emotional pain to the back of my mind for a little while. I also started focusing on making my daily life around the house much safer. I went on Amazon and ordered some things to help me move around better, like grab bars for the bathroom, motion sensor nightlights, and those good non-slip mats. These things are not just about stopping me from having a fall, the kind of accident Stephanie used to use as an excuse to explain away the bruises she gave me. But they also make me feel like I am finally the master of my own life. I even set up an emergency alert app on my phone so that with just one touch, a signal goes straight to the police and to my friend Martha. Cutting her off digitally was a hard thing to do, but I knew it was necessary for my heart to heal. I blocked Stephanie's number and every one of her social media accounts so I would not have to see her face. I was done listening to her insults and those fake apologies she liked to use to get her way. Mr. Morrison also sent her an official letter telling her she was not allowed to come anywhere near me. Clicking that block button felt like a huge weight lifting off my shoulders, like I was finally closing a door to a dark basement that smelled like nothing but trouble and liquor. I spent some time cleaning up the house and putting away anything that reminded me of the bad times we had there. I went to Home Depot and picked out some fresh, bright flowers to put in the window boxes to bring some life and color back into a place that had felt so gloomy for so long. Every little thing I did, from tending to my plants to cooking myself a good meal, felt like another brick in the wall of my freedom. I am not a victim anymore. I am a woman standing strong to protect what is hers. At the end of the day, I sat out on my porch and watched the motion sensor lights pop on as the sun went down. That feeling of safety was finally starting to come back to me. I know this is just the beginning of a long road ahead with the law, but at least tonight, I can sleep without being afraid of someone suddenly appearing by my bed. I picked up my Kindle Paperwhite, made the font nice and big, and started reading a brand new chapter. My life is moving into a new chapter too, one where I am the one making all the rules. But even inside my little fortress, I still felt a bit lonely. That was until one afternoon while I was working on my flower pots and saw a familiar face at the fence. It was Sally, my neighbor I had been avoiding for months because I was too ashamed of the bruises on my arms and did not want her to see me like that. Sally was standing right there at the fence with a tray of warm, fresh-baked goods, the smell of sugar and cinnamon wafting through the air. She told me she heard the shouting from the other day and her voice was just so heavy with a deep kind of understanding. I tried to look away and hide my arms like I always did, but the look in her eyes was so sincere it just held me still. She told me she knew exactly what had been going on in my house, and she wanted me to know that I was not walking this path alone. I just broke down and started crying right then. Those big, heavy tears of pure relief. I finally invited her inside, and for the very first time, I took off my long-sleeved sweater and let her see those bruises that were only just beginning to fade into yellow and green. Sally did not look away in disgust or shame. She just reached out and squeezed my hand tight, promising me right then that she would stand up and be a witness for me if I ever needed her to. It was not long after that when Martha showed up at my door, and she did not come empty-handed. She brought along a lawyer she knew who specialized in protecting the rights and dignity of seniors. We all sat around my dining room table, the three of us just talking and laying out a plan. Martha looked me in the eye and told me she was going to be right by my side, whether we were standing in a crowded courtroom or just sitting through those long, quiet nights when the house felt too big. That warmth coming from my friends, my sisters, it made me realize how much of a mistake I had made by pulling away and trying to hide my pain from the world. That basic faith in human goodness and kindness, the very thing Stephanie tried so hard to kill inside of me, was finally starting to grow back stronger than it ever was before. I started to understand that real strength does not just come from the new deadbolts on my doors or the cameras on my porch. It comes from those warm hugs and the way true friends speak courage into your heart. I did not feel like a lonely, dried-up leaf being blown around by a mean storm anymore. with Sally watching out for me from next door and Martha keeping my spirit lifted. I felt like I was finally ready to face whatever was coming down the road. I looked at that tray of food from Sally and just breathed in the scent of family and belonging. Being connected to people who truly care about you is the best kind of medicine there is for a soul that has been pushed down as much as mine has. I just felt so incredibly grateful that they did not leave me out in the dark during the loneliest hour of my life. It was that support that finally gave me the heart to go in and start cleaning out David's old home office. And right there, tucked away deep between some old, dusty files and records, my hand brushed against a secret David had left behind just for me, a piece of evidence that was about to change the whole direction of this fight. Daisy feels so much warmth having friends like Sally and Martha by her side. To my dear listeners, who was the person who reached out and held your hand when things got hard for you? Please send a greeting or use the phrase best friend to honor that beautiful bond. I was sorting through David's old filing cabinets, trying to make sense of the life he left behind, when a light brown envelope slid out from a narrow gap behind the bottom drawer. There was no name on the outside, just the words, "For Mama," written in my son's shaky handwriting, and my heart started thumping against my ribs as I pulled the tab to open it. Inside was a medical file I had never seen before. A detailed diagnostic report from 6 months ago about the day my wrist was broken. But what truly stopped my breath was the small note clipped to the front where David had written that he knew I claimed I just tripped on the rug, but he had actually heard Stephanie push me from behind. He wrote that he was so sorry for being too weak and too sick to protect me like a son should. The more I read, the more a sick feeling of disgust started to settle in the pit of my stomach as the naked truth came into focus. Tucked at the bottom of the envelope was a small silver USB drive, and when I plugged it into my computer, the room seemed to go cold as the images appeared on the screen. There were dozens of photos of the dark bruises and deep scratches on my back and arms that David must have taken secretly while I was resting, or when I was not looking. Then I found the screenshots of text messages between Stephanie and some stranger, where they were casually discussing how to pressure me into signing over the power of attorney so they could take this house right out from under me. One message from Stephanie flashed on the screen, colder than a winter's night, saying that the old woman was already starting to get confused, and that after just a few more falls, she would finally sign the papers. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized nothing that happened to me was an accident or just a mistake caused by her drinking. It was a calculated, heartless plan to prey on my trust and my growing dependence. David had seen it all happening, and because he knew his own time was running out, he had spent his last days quietly gathering the proof I would need to save myself. Every last illusion I had about Stephanie being family just vanished, and I saw her for what she really was, a predator who had been hunting me in my own home. I immediately got to work copying all that data onto 3 separate USB drives to make sure the truth could never be buried again. I sent one straight to Mr. Morrison's office, gave one to Martha for safekeeping, and took the last one down to the bank to lock it in a secure deposit box. This was the secret weapon David had left for me, and the deep ache of losing him started to mix with a profound sense of gratitude. Even from the other side, my boy was still looking out for his mama and finding a way to shield me. I looked down at those files and felt a new kind of iron-hard determination steadying my soul. Justice did not feel like some far-off, impossible dream anymore. It was something I was holding right there in my own 2 hands. Holding on to all that proof left me feeling completely drained, both in my body and my spirit. I found myself needing to find a place that could give me some strength from my roots. a quiet place where I could talk to the loved ones I have lost and find some peace before this final battle begins. I drove out to the cemetery late in the afternoon while the sun was starting to fade into a soft, pale glow. As I sat there in front of the graves of my boy David and my dear husband, a heavy but gentle silence seemed to wrap around me like an old quilt. I reached out and touched the cold, smooth stone, whispering the words I had been holding in my heart for so long. I told David that I finally found his box, and I thanked him from the bottom of my soul for not leaving his mama behind to face the dark alone. I sat there and let the memories of my husband's voice wash over me, remembering how he always talked about the Fairfield family honor and how we must always keep our backs straight and our heads high when the world tries to bend us. Those memories of pure, honest love that asked for nothing in return started to soothe the deep wounds and the constant fatigue that Stephanie had cut into my spirit. In that sacred, quiet space, I felt an invisible strength starting to pour back into my tired bones and my aching heart. I was no longer just some lonely, aging woman caught up in a messy legal fight. I was a mother and a wife, standing up to protect the legacy and the dignity of the people I loved most in this world. The image of David smiling in my mind felt like a firm hand on my shoulder, a sign that I was finally walking the right path, and that heavy grief began to transform into a strange and beautiful peace. I knew I had to be strong and keep moving forward, not just for my own sake, but for every good thing my husband and my son had spent their lives building before they were taken from me. I stood up and straightened the brim of my Sunday hat, feeling my feet planted more firmly on the ground than they had been in many long years. The storm ahead of me might be a big one, but my roots were now dug deep into the solid soil of truth and family love. I said my goodbyes to them with a quiet, solemn promise that the long years of my silence were finally over and that justice was coming for us all. As I walked out through those cemetery gates, I was not looking down at the dirt or my own shadow anymore. I held my head high, ready for whatever dirty trick or lie Stephanie was planning to throw my way next, because that determination had finally become a part of my very blood and bone. I was right to be on my guard, because Stephanie was not about to let me find any real peace just yet. She had decided to come at me with her most hateful and cowardly plan yet. But this time, she was not just going after my money or my house. She was going after my very sanity and my dignity by reporting false claims to the authorities, trying to make the world believe I was no longer fit to care for myself. The pounding on my front door started early that morning, a sharp, hurried sound that didn't sit right with the quiet of the neighborhood. When I opened it, I wasn't looking at Stephanie, but a woman in a stiff suit holding a thick leather briefcase. She introduced herself as an investigator from Adult Protective Services and told me they had received a formal report that I was suffering from severe cognitive decline and could no longer manage my own basic needs. My heart squeezed tight in my chest, a cold wave of realization washing over me. Stephanie had done this. She was trying to weaponize the very system meant to protect people like me, hoping to strip away my autonomy and turn me into a helpless ghost in my own home. I invited her in, keeping my back straight and my voice as calm as a steady lake. But I immediately pulled out my phone to call Mr. Morrison and put him on speakerphone. The investigator began with what we call orientation questions in the medical field, asking me if I knew what day it was or the name of the current president of the United States. The sheer insult of it made my blood boil, but I didn't let my anger show. Stephanie had fed them a long list of lies, claiming I was leaving the stove burning, getting lost on my own street, and having hallucinations about being mistreated by my own family. I walked that investigator through every room of my house to show her the truth of how I lived. Everything was in its proper place, tidy and cared for. I showed her my medical cabinet, where my calcium and vitamin D supplements were lined up perfectly by day, along with my blood pressure medication. I presented my neatly filed bills, all paid on time, and explained that I maintained regular checkups with my primary care physician within my Medicare network. The professional discipline I had practiced for 30 years as a nurse rose up in me, helping me answer every one of her pointed questions with logic and absolute clarity. But Stephanie had planned this attack deeper than I had imagined. The investigator pulled out a paper from a psychiatrist I had never even met, a document concluding that I was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. A cold shiver ran down my spine when I realized she had actually found a doctor willing to sign off on a forged evaluation just to help her steal my life. I looked that woman in the eye and told her, with the full weight of my lawyer listening in, that I formally rejected that assessment and demanded an independent evaluation at a major university hospital. I told her I would not be herded into a nursing home like cattle just to satisfy someone else's greed. The investigator's demeanor began to shift when she saw my resilience and my understanding of the law. Her pen scratched across her notepad as I reached for the USB drive David had left me and began showing her the photos of the bruises on my arms and the medical records of my injuries. I told her that this was the real reason my daughter-in-law wanted me declared incompetent, because the truth of her abuse was finally coming to light. My initial sense of being violated had transformed into an indomitable will. I wasn't just defending my sanity anymore. I was exposing the predator who was hiding behind a mask of concern. By the time the woman left, I felt like I had just walked through a minefield and made it to the other side. Stephanie had crossed every moral line left to her, trying to erase my legal existence just to get her hands on David's estate. But her desperate move had backfired in the most perfect way. By dragging Adult Protective Services into our lives, she had accidentally created an official investigative record where my evidence was now documented by a government authority. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror and saw a Daisy Fairfield who was stronger than she had ever been. This confrontation was my declaration to the world. I was still here. I was clear-headed, and I would not be broken. After failing to have me committed, Stephanie knew she had run out of quiet ways to ruin me. She decided to play her very last card by filing a formal lawsuit to claim David's entire inheritance and take control of all his assets. We were finally stepping through the heavy doors of the courthouse, ready for the law to decide our fate. My dear listeners, Daisy had to fight with everything she had to prove her own mind was sound against those cruel lies. Do you believe that staying sharp and keeping your knowledge current is the best way to protect yourself as the years go by? Please comment with the word wise to share your thoughts with us. The rain was coming down in thick, gray sheets that Tuesday afternoon when the formal court summons finally landed on my porch. Stephanie was actually going through with it, suing me for what her lawyer called illegal appropriation of assets and asking a judge to strip me of the very roof over my head. I spent the next several hours tucked away in Mr. Morrison's office, where the air was heavy with the scent of mahogany and stale coffee. We moved through every single piece of evidence with a quiet, focused intensity. The 3 copies of the USB drives David had hidden for me, my medical files from the emergency room, and the signed testimony from my neighbor Sally. There was such a weighted stillness in that room, the kind of deep hush that settles over the porch right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. To my surprise, that old familiar flutter of panic in my chest was gone, replaced by a strange and solid calm that felt like an anchor holding me steady. Just 2 days before we were supposed to stand before the judge, a messenger brought over a document Stephanie's lawyer called a settlement offer. It was a cold, insulting piece of paper that said she would drop the lawsuit if I just agreed to hand over 70% of David's estate and move myself into a small one-bedroom apartment somewhere else. Mr. Morrison slid the paper across the desk toward me, his eyes telling me he already knew my heart. He whispered that they were acting out of pure fear because they had finally caught a glimpse of the truth we were about to bring into the light. I didn't even have to blink. I pushed that offer right back toward him and told him there would be no compromise and no backroom deals. I wasn't doing this for the money or the house itself. I was doing it for the truth and for the memory of my son who had tried so hard to protect me. I was ready to face her in the light of day. The night before the trial, I found myself sitting alone in the middle of my living room, just looking at the clothes I had laid out on the chair. I had chosen a navy blue suit, the fabric crisp and dignified, the kind of outfit a woman wears when she knows exactly who she is. I didn't want to walk into that courthouse looking like a frail, broken victim for people to pity. I wanted to look like a Fairfield woman who still had her pride and her dignity intact. I took out David's final letter and read his shaky handwriting one last time, letting the warmth of his love wrap around me like a thick, handmade quilt. Every single step had been thought out, and every piece of proof was ready to be shown to the world. When I finally climbed into bed and clicked off the lamp, sleep came to me quickly, as gentle and peaceful as a quiet pond when the wind has completely died down. Early the next morning, I heard the familiar rumble of Martha's car pulling up to the curb. She and Sally walked up to my door with expressions that were as steady as stone. Before we even made it to the car, the three of us stood there in the driveway, joined our hands in a tight circle, and shared a soft, earnest prayer for strength and for the truth to prevail. Sally squeezed my fingers and reminded me that the truth doesn't need a lot of fancy words, because it has a way of standing up all on its own. As we drove toward the center of the city, I watched the morning hustle of people going to work and living their lives. But for me, it felt like the whole world had slowed down to a standstill. This was the day to finally put an end to the years of being pushed into the shadows, to reclaim my name, and to step into a life where I was finally free. My heart was beating with a slow, rhythmic certainty, just like a grandfather clock that refused to lose even a single second. The massive doors of the courtroom swung open with a heavy sound, and the air inside was cold and filled with a somber kind of majesty. Stephanie was already sitting at her table with her lawyer, her chin held high in that same old arrogant way, but I noticed the way her eyes kept darting toward the door, filled with an uneasiness she couldn't quite hide. The bailiff called the room to order as the judge took the bench, and the trial of Daisy Fairfield was officially underway. The air inside the courtroom was chilled to a sharp edge, smelling of old wood, floor wax, and the heavy weight of 100 years of secrets. I sat there at the defense table, my back straight and my hands clasped together, watching Stephanie play her part. She was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, making soft, whimpering sounds while her lawyer told the judge that I was a danger to myself and needed to be protected from my own confusion. He stood there in his expensive suit, gesturing toward me like I was a broken piece of furniture, claiming that I was lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. He told the court that I had been imagining being hurt, and that I had actually attacked Stephanie in a fit of delirium. The lies were so thick and so ugly that it felt like they were sucking the very oxygen out of the room. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the pulse in my neck steady and rhythmic, reminding myself that the truth was sitting right there beside me. Mr. Morrison stood up when it was our turn, and he didn't start with a loud voice or a fancy speech. He moved with a quiet, deliberate power that seemed to command the attention of everyone in that room. He began by laying out the medical evaluation from the university hospital, a document that was signed by the most respected doctors in the state. He read the parts that proved my mind was as clear as a summer morning, and that the previous diagnosis Stephanie had provided was nothing but a shameful forgery. Then he called Sally to the witness stand. Watching my neighbor walk up there, her Sunday best pressed and her face set in a look of grim determination, made my heart swell with pride. She told the judge about every single scream she had heard coming through the walls, and about the day she saw me out in the yard with bruises on my arms that I tried so hard to hide under long sleeves. Stephanie's face started to lose its color, turning a sickly kind of gray as she realized that her secrets were being dragged out into the bright light of day. The real turning point of the morning happened when Mr. Morrison brought out the secret weapon David had left for me. He set down a small speaker on the evidence table, and then the voice of my son filled that silent courtroom. It was a recording David had taken on his phone during one of Stephanie's rages, and the sound of her screaming for money while I begged her to stop because she was hurting me was like a physical blow to everyone in the room. You could hear the sound of something breaking, and then my own voice, small and trembling, asking why she was doing this to me. The courtroom went so quiet you could hear the ticking of the clock on the far wall. I closed my eyes and let the sound of David's bravery wash over me, feeling like he was standing right there with his hand on my shoulder. Stephanie was shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the table, her mouth hanging open but not a single lie coming out. When I was finally called to the stand, I took a moment to look at the judge, a man who had seen everything, and I began to tell my story in my own words. I spoke about the 30 years I spent as a nurse in this city, holding the hands of the dying and helping the sick find their way back to health. I talked about the love I had for my husband and for David, and how I had spent my whole life trying to build a home that was filled with peace and respect. I told the court that I didn't come there that day looking for revenge or to see anyone suffer, even after everything that had been done to me. I told them I was simply there to reclaim the dignity and the self-worth that every person deserves, especially when they have reached their golden years. My voice didn't shake once, and as I spoke, I felt a sense of power and grace that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The judge didn't even hesitate when it was time to give his ruling. He picked up that heavy wooden gavel and hit it against the bench with a sound that felt like a thunderclap. He dismissed every single one of Stephanie's claims, calling them a disgraceful attempt to exploit a vulnerable woman. He ruled that the house, the savings, and everything David had worked for would stay exactly where they belonged, in my hands and under my control. But he didn't stop there. He looked directly at Stephanie and told her that her actions were not just greedy, but criminal. He ordered the police and Adult Protective Services to begin a full investigation into the abuse and the forged medical documents. Hearing him speak those words felt like a mountain was finally being lifted off my chest, allowing me to breathe deep for the first time in years. As we walked out of those massive courthouse doors, the bright Florida sun hit my face, and it felt like a blessing from above. I saw Stephanie being led toward a side exit by the investigators, her head hanging low and all that arrogance finally drained out of her. She didn't look like a predator anymore. She just looked like a lost woman who had traded her soul for a chance at a fast buck. Martha and Sally wrapped me up in a hug so tight it nearly took my breath away, and the three of us just stood there on the sidewalk, crying tears of pure joy and relief. The justice I had been praying for wasn't just on a piece of paper. It was a warm, living thing that was glowing inside my heart. I looked up at the palm trees swaying in the breeze and knew that the years of hiding and being afraid were finally over. I was Daisy Fairfield. I was free, and my real life was just beginning. A few months later, I made the decision to sell that old house, which was just too full of painful memories, and I moved into a peaceful senior living community right by the beach. Every single morning, I wake up to the gentle sound of the waves crashing against the shore, and I head out for a walk on the warm sand wearing my comfortable Skechers that make me feel like I am walking on air. I joined a gentle yoga class with some of my new friends, and I finally have the time to sit on my balcony for hours, thimbles and thread in hand, or getting lost in the pages of a good book. I even started looking at those cruises I used to only dream about, because now I have the freedom to go wherever the wind takes me. I don't have to wear long sleeves to hide any bruises anymore, because now the only thing touching my skin is the warmth of the sun and the kindness of real friends. I have finally found myself again, the real Daisy Fairfield, who is full of life and completely in control of her own destiny. My dear listeners, I want to leave you with a message from my heart, which is to never ever use your silence to feed an injustice. Loving your children or your family does not mean you have to give them permission to trample on your dignity or your body. You have spent your whole life giving and sacrificing for others, and your golden years are the time when you deserve to feel the most respected and the most safe. Please find the courage to set your boundaries and look for allies you can trust, because the truth has a power that can break any chain. You are never too old to start your life over, and I promise you that justice will always find its way to those who are brave enough to stand up for themselves. I wish you all peace and a life that is full and beautiful on your own journey. Thank you for sharing this time with me. It means so much to have you here. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with a sister who needs to hear it. We are never alone when we stand together. Stay strong, keep your light shining, and stay blessed until next time.